In the annals of medieval history, kings have met their end in countless ways, on the battlefield, at the point of an assassin's blade, or quietly in their sleep. But one king's death stands apart as a tale so grotesque and unforgettable that it echoed through the chronicles of his age. It is the story of King Sancho VII of Navarre, remembered not for his victories, but for the horrifying, drawn-out way his body began to betray him while he still lived. To his subjects, he became known not only as a ruler, but as the king who rotted alive. Sancho was a man of contradictions, both warrior and diplomat, feared by enemies and respected by allies. Standing well over 6 feet tall, he was a towering presence in the 13th century, earning the nickname Sancho the Strong. For years, his reign was marked by military campaigns and alliances that kept Navarre's borders intact against powerful neighbors like Castile and Aragon. But beneath his imposing figure, time and fate had begun a quiet assault. Accounts suggest Sancho may have suffered from a form of gangrene or leprosy, diseases poorly understood in the Middle Ages, often regarded as divine punishment or a curse. In his final years, his once energetic frame slowed, his gait stiffened, and whispers spread through the court that the king's flesh was changing. By the time the first signs became impossible to ignore, Sancho had withdrawn from public life. Chroniclers wrote of a sickening stench that clung to the royal chambers, and servants were instructed to burn herbs and incense at all hours. Visitors left pale-faced, murmuring about how the king's skin seemed to darken in patches, his limbs wrapped in heavy cloth even in the heat of summer. The affliction was relentless. His flesh began to fester, blackening and splitting. Sores opened and refused to heal, oozing with a corruption the royal physicians could not stop. The king's body, still very much alive, was slowly decomposing, a living death in the heart of his own palace. The disease advanced with horrifying speed. In an age without antibiotics or surgical precision, every attempt to slow the rot seemed to make it worse. Court physicians tried poultices made of honey and wine, believing them to have cleansing powers. They bathed him in vinegar and herbs, thinking the acidity would draw out the poison. Nothing worked. By now, the stench of his chambers could be detected down the palace corridors. Those who attended him did so with cloths tied over their mouths, and even his most loyal servants could only endure brief moments at his bedside. Records suggest his condition brought political affairs to a near standstill. Ambassadors refused audiences, fearing both disease and the disturbing sight of the king's decaying flesh. Sancho, however, did not surrender his dignity easily. Even as his body failed, he continued to issue orders, sign decrees, and receive reports from his ministers. But his court was fractured. Some saw his illness as a sign from God that Navarre's reign under his line was cursed. Superstition mixed with politics, and enemies outside and inside the kingdom watched for an opportunity. Physically, the king was becoming unrecognizable. His once strong hands, capable of wielding a sword in battle, were now swollen and darkened, covered in sores. His legs, bound in linen, were said to seep a foul liquid that stained the wrappings. Chroniclers note that parts of his skin had taken on a greenish hue, and the corruption had begun to eat away muscle beneath. The pain was constant and agonizing. The most disturbing detail comes from an anonymous court servant's account. The king's body gave off the unmistakable odor of the grave, though his heart still beat. His breathing was labored, and he often moaned in his sleep. At times, he would drift into delirium, speaking to long-dead relatives or muttering about battles fought decades earlier. The disease was not only destroying his flesh, it was wearing down his mind. By the final months of his life, King Sancho was a prisoner within both his body and his palace. He could no longer walk without assistance. His meals were brought to him on silver platters, though he ate very little. The rot in his body seemed to have poisoned his appetite. Even the richest dishes tasted like ashes. He spent hours lying still, swaddled in heavy cloth to contain both the odor and the sight of his wounds. Priests were summoned regularly, not only to offer prayers for his recovery, but also to prepare his soul for death. Some whispered that the king's suffering was penance for the blood spilled during his reign. Others said it was simply the fate of all men, no matter how mighty. In the flickering candlelight of his chamber, Sancho reportedly spoke of his regrets, confessing that the weight of the crown was heavier than any sword he had ever lifted. His body's decay was now impossible to hide. The infection had spread so far that entire sections of skin and tissue seemed to slough away with the gentlest touch. The royal physicians tried to keep the wounds clean, but their instruments and remedies were crude. The king endured excruciating pain during these treatments, his groans echoing down the marble halls. Outside the palace, the people of Navarre knew their ruler was dying. Markets buzzed with rumors, and foreign courts began preparing for succession disputes. Yet despite the whispers and the fear, some still prayed for his recovery. For Sancho had been a defender of the realm in his youth, a figure of strength who once commanded respect across kingdoms. In a rare moment of lucidity, he is said to have told his closest advisor, "I feel the earth calling to me, but it comes slowly, too slowly." He was a man fully aware that his body was failing in the most cruel and unnatural way possible, and yet death would not come swiftly. When the end finally arrived in 1234, it was not with the glory of a battlefield death, nor the peaceful stillness of old age. King San died in his bedchamber, surrounded by a handful of loyal attendants and priests. His body, by then, was so ravaged that those who prepared him for burial struggled to move him without tearing the fragile, decayed flesh. He was laid to rest at the monastery of Roncesvalles, a place tied to his lineage and faith. His tomb, carved with dignity and solemnity, gave no hint of the gruesome suffering that had marked his final years. The stone effigy atop his grave shows him as he was in his prime, tall, armored, and unyielding. History, however, remembers more than the image carved in stone. The story of the king who rotted alive became a grim warning in medieval chronicles.